Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. Purpose of this meeting is to talk about Bath and North East Somerset Council, their journey to the cloud, and how they went around creating a business case for Microsoft Cloud. My name's Josh. I'm one of the cloud sales executive at Cloud Direct, otherwise known as an account manager. And I'll start by just giving you a bit of an introduction to Cloud Direct. So Cloud Direct, Microsoft consultancy, first and foremost. We only deliver Microsoft solutions. You'll see this hedgehog on the left. This is the best way to memorize Cloud Direct. Story behind this hedgehog. The hedgehog is known for doing one thing and one thing well, effectively curling up in a ball and showing its spikes. And similarly to the hedgehog, Cloud Direct focus on one thing, and that's Microsoft solutions. So we're an Azure Expert MSP. The highest level of Microsoft accreditation in the world, and one of our specialist subject areas is infrastructure migration. Furthermore, we've been, we've won multiple awards, but one of them being around the solution assessments, and that's an area we'll be looking to speak to you about more today. By way of introduction to our speaker today, we've got Liam with us. So Liam is the head of IT at Bath and North East Somerset Council. Kindly has agreed to help us with this webinar today to really kind of talk you through their journey in creating this business case, and the lessons learned and how that may be able to help you with your council. So Liam, just by way of introduction, would you like to introduce yourself and just give us a bit of a background on Baines, please?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for inviting me along today. So hi all, I'm Liam Abbott. I'm the head of IT services at Bath and North East Somerset Council, and I started in this role actually literally pretty much a year ago today, having previously worked as heads of IT and directors of IT across NHS and health and social care settings. So I'll give a bit of a background around sort of what I inherited here, which will hopefully ring true for a number of people on this call. So a year ago I inherited a sort of what I would call a traditional server infrastructure and infrastructure setup. So Microsoft Stack primarily, VMware as the hosting platform, on-premise solutions, backing up to tape, etc., and sort of a traditional setup with our infrastructure team. So we had a sort of a server team primarily responsible for the server infrastructure, and network team primarily responsible for the network and wide area network infrastructure, and voice team, etc. So inherited pretty much effectively a primary on-premise solution, Josh. So probably 80–90% of our solutions a year ago were on-premise solutions, with a handful only cloud SaaS solutions. In terms of the teams, what I inherited was a bit of a lack of a skills gap as well, Josh. So it was clear that there was a bit of a lack of investment in the training and development of those teams as well. So it was a sort of relatively low base, unfortunately, to start with a year ago.
That's brilliant. Okay, thank you, Liam. I think that's very similar to a lot of the councils that will be on the call today. You've described you're on-prem at the moment, or you were previously. Why actually the move to cloud initially, and why Microsoft Azure?
Yeah, sure. So the on-premise infrastructure was aging, so coming up to the end of its relevant warranties and care packs, etc. And so there was an opportunity for change from a financial perspective, rather than investing in large amounts of new server infrastructure on-premise, but also it was around some of the risks that on-premise infrastructure and the investment had created. So to give an example of that, backups were still being done to tape. We weren't active for our server infrastructure, so some of our critical systems were only available on sort of single servers or single infrastructure stacks, and that would cause difficulties in the event of any compromise, or be that fire, flood, cyber, etc. So there were some quite large risks to the way our infrastructure was currently set up, and there was a choice to be made, Josh, around investing in a new on-premise solution and infrastructure, etc., and making it active and all the appropriate resilience, etc., or migrating to cloud. So that was sort of where the the decision point started, if you like. So in terms of what sort of happened next, well, there was a lot that happened next. Actually, it was effectively a full evaluation of what we already had, and an initial sort of options appraisal around migrating to cloud versus on-premise, and that's when we started those sort of conversations with cloud providers like Microsoft, as you said. So Microsoft came in. So our on-premise infrastructure was relatively easy to ascertain what we had, obviously, but also to sort of ascertain where we would potentially go to, because the teams were familiar with it. They knew what sort of would need to be purchased in order to create that suitable active setup. But from a cloud perspective, we were quite green. We didn't have the expertise or the knowledge to understand what that would look like and what that would be costed like, what skills gap, etc. So that was where, about a year ago, we started initial conversations with Microsoft directly. So we initially reached out to suitable account managers at Microsoft to start that engagement, before later bringing in a partner like Cloud Direct. But in our initial discussions were with Microsoft, yes.
I think as well, one thing that was apparent to me, kind of, you know, thinking back, is am I right in thinking that you did have some cultural challenges of, you know, the team were typically used to working on-prem and in that way of thinking?
Yeah, so a lot of expertise around that on-premise infrastructure and that stack. You know, they knew VMware like the back of their hands, etc., and the suitable SANs and servers and all the other bits that I'm sure a number of people on this call have got similar setup. So there was a skills gap for cloud, and there was a bit of resistance around that sort of larger change. But that initial resistance sort of faded with the engagement. So there's a few things that we did there. One, got them all involved in the engagement around the cloud assessments, etc., so that they weren't feeling like it was being done to them. They were a part of that scoping exercise and workshops. And then the other one was around training and development. So they hadn't had, well, they'd had little training and development for a number of years. And so it's things like the Microsoft Enterprise Skills Initiative. We'll put a link in the chat later, but that's something that's available for anyone that's got a Microsoft Enterprise agreement, and gives some instructor-led courses on Azure, on Power Platform, etc. And so there was some things that we weren't making use of to try and improve their knowledge and sort of get them really interested and excited and engaged in the potential journey to the cloud.
That's perfect.
So, yeah,
and obviously, like you know, any local regional government is going to have challenges around costs, and I think, you know,
absolutely.
initially this was positioned as a cost saving exercise, but
yeah,
throughout that process, you know, it became apparent maybe we wouldn't realize the savings that we wanted. How was that for you?
So the initial Microsoft assessment, so when we engaged with Microsoft directly, they did a Microsoft assessment, and that was really useful as a starting point, but it had a number of assumptions. So it was very, very useful to do things like benchmark, you know, where we are in terms of our carbon efficiency, etc., and where we could migrate to and modernize some of our applications by migrating to Azure. But from a costings perspective, it made some assumptions on our costs, which weren't true. So the initial assessment didn't stack up financially. So what we then ended up doing was actually ourselves really reviewing our on-premise costs. Because you know, we were capitally purchasing equipment, servers, SANs, etc., but we also had revenue costs for things like VMware licenses, Microsoft data center licenses, SQL licenses, you know, support and maintenance, backup software, etc. So we did a breakdown. We got a report from our finance system, which ended up being 600 and something lines, 618 lines for the last 5 years worth of spend on our server and our infrastructure. So it was a detailed spreadsheet, but effectively detailed, well, what have we spent over the last 5 years in our server infrastructure? And it totted up to multiple millions of pounds. But when we break it down, it actually roughly split to approximately 50%, 50% being capital purchase of equipment, servers, hardware, and approximately 50% for support, maintenance, licenses, backup software, and other pieces. So we did a much more detailed breakdown of our own spend, Josh, rather than using the Microsoft figures for what they assumed we were spending, to break it down, and that allowed us to give a much better comparison for costings versus the cloud.
Perfect. Okay, and I should have said at the beginning as well, obviously we are accepting questions as well, so
Please.
feel free to pop your questions in throughout and we'll answer them as we go. So obviously you've explained the process now around the Microsoft solution assessment. This is really where you started to work with Cloud Direct.
Yes.
How did that kind of come around for you, and what was that process like?
So the Microsoft assessment was useful to start us on the journey as I've described, and some work that I've described that we did internally around our own costings. But really, we needed to take it to the next level. So we spoke with Microsoft and said, OK, we need to, Microsoft operates on a partner model. We need to engage with a partner to now come and look at this in more detail for us, set up a proposal, go through the costings, help us write the business case, etc. So Microsoft do something they call, what was the wording? They call it a carousel, a partner carousel. That's Microsoft's wording, not mine. But Microsoft effectively suggested only a handful of their highest accredited partners, of which Cloud Direct were one. And you described earlier, Josh, that you've got one of the highest accreditations for Azure in those specialist areas. So we met with yourselves, had an initial discussion, felt our culture and values, etc., matched. So that was where our initial engagement came. What I would recommend to the people on the call is to go through that same sort of process. Microsoft will recommend suitable partners. Cloud Direct absolutely are one of the highest accredited. So make sure for the relevant work you're picking the partners with the relevant accreditation. So that's how we sort of started our engagement with yourselves at Cloud Direct.
Yeah, that's perfect. And yeah, just to expand on that point, actually, because it's a good point, the Azure Expert MSP accreditation, really, if you're going to work with a partner, it has to be there. It means that the partner's been audited on an annual basis. It means that you obviously got access to a safe pair of hands, but also we had access to Microsoft funding. So any Microsoft funding that's available, which is obviously important for any council.
Yeah, I think that's probably worth highlighting, Josh, actually, is that by choosing yourselves as that Azure MSP, we did get a significant Microsoft funding into the hundreds of thousands of pounds. So it's definitely worth ensuring you choose a relevant partner with the relevant status, and Cloud Direct being one that you're on the call with today, because they can access funding, available streams to help with that migration.
Yeah, that's perfect. Just one final point around the Cloud Direct collaboration, Liam. Obviously, we spoke about the solution assessment initially, looking at the costing profiles in comparison to your on-prem infrastructure, but obviously there was a piece of work there around workshops, etc. Do you want to? Even if people are looking to work with Cloud Direct or another partner, I think that was quite an essential part of the process.
Yeah, sure. So as we described, the initial Microsoft assessment was good in an initial part, but really we needed to get to a better level of detail. We needed to go into our 300 plus servers, understand the systems that we were hosting. How would they be hosted on Azure? What would that costing model look like? So in order to do that over those 300 plus servers and systems, we had to go into some pretty detailed workshops. So Josh, we had a number of workshops, some of them focused on particular areas such as network. So things like Azure Express Route, how do we connect our current laptops in the council, what VPNs, how do they terminate, how would they terminate when our solutions are then in Azure, through to workshops around workloads such as databases. So, do they stay as they are and lift and shift? Do we modernize using Azure SQL managed instance, etc., and also our front end applications and web servers? Should they stay as they are and lift and shift and be on IIS and Apache, or should we be leveraging things like the web app and other capabilities that we just didn't have access to on premise? So we went through a really good workshop process with Cloud Direct, And effectively, each of those workshops enabled us to get a full proposal from Cloud Direct. I think we ended up with 5 versions of that proposal before we finalised, actually, Josh, from memory. There was a number of tweaks as we went through, but those workshops were critical in understanding what the proposed Azure migration and costs would be. And then that workshop and that output allowed us to compare that to our on-premise costs and infrastructure. I'm just noticing there's a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to answer a couple if that's okay. So Colin, you've mentioned, did we leverage Windows licensing SA from our enterprise agreement? So yeah, so yeah, absolutely. One of those 600 and something odd lines was around things like our Windows Data Center and SQL Server licensing. And so it's around, and again, Cloud Direct helped with all of this, but it's around ensuring, well, what's the most cost-effective way of leveraging that license? Is it to retain that SA license and then to effectively not need to license it through Azure, or is it to migrate it to Azure? And Colin, that ultimately comes down to what those licenses are and how many SQL servers you've got, what versions they are, for example, are they data center, are they standards, etc. But what I would say is that don't make assumptions. Let a partner like Cloud Direct do that work for you. Would be my thoughts on that one. And I think there was another one from someone around similar analysis of costs. Fully agree with comment on details. Did you include cost of staff, electricity? So staff, no. So no, this is not not at all a staff costing efficiency exercise. That was never how it's been approached at Bath and North East Somerset Council. The staff that are managing the on-site on-premise infrastructure will manage the Azure infrastructure and the appropriate integrations, etc. So no, I've never intended for any staff reductions. Electricity, though, yes, absolutely. So we did do a lot of work around one of our data centers, for example, was costing £28,000 a year in electricity costs. The electricity's gone up, we all know that. And that's quite a significant carbon impact as well. So one of the benefits of moving to Azure, they're carbon neutral or shortly carbon neutral, going carbon negative. And at the council, we realistically can't get to that carbon negative position. So yes, electricity costs were factored in as well.
I think also that leads us on really nicely as well, actually, Liam. We can spend some time on this. So there was a large internal process that you had to go through. You were new to the council and the council processes, and I think there's some massive lessons learned here that could help expedite the process. So really starting from the beginning of that costings and an approval process, what does that actually look like?
Sure. So again, this is my first position in the council, but I've worked in public sector NHS for a number of years. But internal approval was difficult. Let's be clear. And I know each council and each local government will have their own sorts of processes, but there were some definite lessons learned around that sort of financial approval process. So moving from what was effectively a circa capital/revenue budget to what will effectively become a revenue budget. There was difficult challenges there, and I'm happy to discuss some of those on the finances. But there was also difficulties for sort of internal approvals in general. So there was a very clear process, or there is a very clear process in our council for capital approvals and capital steering groups, etc. Not so clear on the approval process for the larger revenue increases, and there was sort of budget settings and growth that caused difficult. I think in hindsight, having now gone through that journey, and I stuttered a few times going to the relevant wrong groups, or perhaps presenting information not quite in the way they wanted, I would have mapped out my internal approval process in advance of starting that sort of business case process. I would have gone, okay, the value is going to be X. That means I need to go to this group first, then that finance steering group, then I need to go to an IT steering group, then I need to go to corporate management team, etc. So I would recommend anyone going down this journey to sort of map out your internal approval processes. For those that have worked in local government perhaps longer than I have, they may already have that mapped. So, but for those that haven't done this before, for that sort of quite large revenue financial implications, I would recommend mapping it out.
Yeah. Okay. So what people did you need to get engaged? Like, what process did you actually need to go through in terms of like a people process?
So do you mean as in my own staff, or as in across the wider council?
Across the wider council, I think there's a few senior stakeholders you need
There
to get
was,
buy-in
yeah.
from,
So
for example.
absolutely. So that process I've described at a high level, that because the revenue increase over a 5-year period, which is the period of time we were costing this for, so we were comparing cloud costings and anticipated costings to a 5/7 year on-premise solution, because if we were buying SANs and servers, etc., they would normally come with a 5-year or maybe 7-year with care packs, etc. warranty. So that meant that the value of the contract was high, because a 5-year Azure costings were coming into the millions, as they would for 5 years on premise. But that sign off meant, because it's over our internal process, because it's over £500,000, that required a cabinet approval. So again, I'm not certain if other local governments would be set up the same way, but effectively we had to go through appropriate internal officer sign off, so finance steering groups, etc., IT steering groups, sort of senior leadership teams, etc., but also cabinet approval as well, which added an element of complexity. It's probably fair to say. So again, it just comes back to understanding what your process would be for sign off. If you understand that in advance, in hindsight, I wish I had mapped that out. I stuttered a few times before getting it over the line. But yeah,
I think you've described a few of those as well. Is there any other challenges that you can think of that you had during that process that potentially others could learn from?
So I suppose the business case, which I'm happy to share with people directly afterwards if they want to get in contact with me, what they were looking for on that business case. I initially started with quite a large business case describing all of in relatively large amount of detail all the benefits and the opportunities that it gave, etc. From a technical perspective, they didn't massively want all of that detail, so I ended up slimming it down quite a bit, and coming up with the high level benefits, and then the costing piece, and then an appropriate internal approval for some of the culture elements, training and development, etc. So it ended up being actually a reasonably small business case from it's not 20-30 pages. It was actually quite succinct. So yeah, that process was again interesting. I thought they would want a much higher level of detail, and actually they wanted the more assurance piece rather than the technical detail piece.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Liam. Yeah, and thanks for offering to share that with
yeah, happy to if people reach out directly afterwards, I'm happy to share that.
If you can kind of cast your mind back and remember, are you able to kind of share just now what were the key components, I guess, of that business case, just to give people a bit of an idea of what's really be included?
Key components: existing spend. So we've described mapping existing spend, predicted spend. So that's the financial comparison. And just to let everyone know on the call, actually, the Azure comparison ended up cheaper than what we were spending. So not by much. It came out, so one of them came out at circa 2.5 million, one of them came out at 3. But so the Azure costings, and this is bearing in mind we were still backing up to tape, we weren't active, etc. The Azure costings actually came in quite a bit less than we were expecting. And just another highlight on that, there are some things that Cloud Direct can help with access to Microsoft funding, but also a lot of people don't realize you get public sector discount on Azure pricing as well. So don't go by a normal Azure calculation. If I'm making, don't use the public website to plumb in the costs and come up with a Azure figure. It'll be wrong. Get it done with the public sector pricing and the discounts, because that makes a big difference. So yeah, the costing piece in the business case. Then there was a piece around transition. So we wouldn't be able to get there by a flick of a switch. So there was a bit around what the migration would look like, bringing in a partner, Cloud Direct, obviously, what that sort of timeline would look like and that migration would look like, and then also things such as the benefits piece around carbon and all of the other bits that we can go on to as well around benefits.
Definitely, and yeah, don't quote me on this because there may be some caveats that Microsoft have got, but I think generally the percentage is around 12% discount for public sector bodies.
Yeah, it's
they provide on
12%, but
as well,
it's it takes a good chunk off, but also there's some public sector SKUs and bits and pieces that you can gain access to as
yeah,
well.
perfect. Okay, I think I think we do have a few more questions in the
yeah,
chat.
please. Oh, let's have a look. You mentioned backup. Have you found the backup options for full tenant level backups? Okay, so backup wise, yeah, sure, we can discuss that. So we're using Veeam. I suspect a number of people are. We're using Veeam and Rubrik actually at the moment. We're using two products. So Veeam we're using for our main on-premise VM backups, and Rubrik we're using for our Office 365 solution. So one thing I should probably say is that we are I suspect most are, but we are an Office 365 tenant. So we're using Veeam and Rubrik currently. We're implementing Azure backup as part of the solution, but we're also looking at the comparison between Azure backup and solutions such as Rubrik as well. So we could potentially expand our Rubrik solution, but as part of our engagement with Cloud Direct and with our requirements mapping, Azure backup covers all of our requirements. It probably doesn't do quite as many bells and whistles as perhaps something like Rubrik might, but it does actually cover all of our requirements and has come on quite a way. So again, as part of the engagement and the delivery is that Azure backup's been fully configured for us, ready to use, so that as soon as we migrate solutions, etc., things are backed up successfully and able to be restored to other zones and other availability zones, other regions really easily. But yeah, happy to, again, if you reach out directly, I can talk a little bit more about backups. Other questions we've had. Press too soon. Was the difficulty related to change from capital to revenue? Is that from Jussie? Yes. Yes, that's the short answer. A little bit more. So yeah, the capital spend on the servers was approximately 50%. Revenue, this is current spend, was approximately 50%. It's now moved to a complete revenue model. You know, we're hosting, so by hosting everything in Azure, it changes that model completely. So that was a difficulty around that financial approval. But conversely, we use something called, and I'm going to get the wording right now, service supported borrowing for capital. What that effectively meant is that we were borrowing ahead and you know, paying gradually for capital for our servers. So we were in a bit of an odd position where we were not able to purchase them outright, and we were spreading that cost over the 5 years as well. So effectively almost a revenue cost. So it was a bit of an oddity there. I'm happy to break down more into the capital versus revenue, but that was a challenge. But what we did find is that we were handing back, in inverted commas, an awful lot of capital that we wouldn't be spending versus going to revenue. And the one thing to pick up on the revenue as well is that all of these costings that we did the comparison for was assuming we have all of our systems turned on 24/7, 365, which is how we currently operate. All of our servers and systems are turned on every day, 24 hours a day, 365. However, there are large parts of the council that operate on a Monday to Friday model. They wouldn't be accessing their solutions outside of certain key times. So we have also the flexibility in Azure to turn things off. You know, is it being used at 11 o'clock at night through till 6 in the morning? No, and Azure will tell us that it's not being used, and we can turn it off to save costs. So when we did our cost comparison, we were comparing 24/7 to 24/7, but actually there's opportunities to reduce costs quite a lot in Azure as well. Okay, do you operate a chargeback model to your authorities departments for the use? No, we have a digital strategy. Again, I'll send the link round because it's public and on our website. Our digital strategy is to migrate to cloud, but our digital strategy is to centralize all costs. So all procurements for IT systems and solutions are centralized to IT. So no, we don't operate a chargeback model. It just adds, in my opinion, it adds inefficiency and an internal process that is quite difficult. The only areas we do offer charge is where we sort of have outsourced services. So we might have third parties that leverage some of our systems and solutions, and they pay on a user model for access to things like our social care systems or other suitable infrastructure. But we don't do a chargeback model within our own council.
Perfect. Yeah, we're running ahead of time, so we do have time for more questions and answers throughout the session. So please do keep them coming. On the next section, so obviously, you know, you spoke about the culture. Let's be honest, you didn't have a bad culture as you came into the business.
No.
There was just some hesitation around, you know, great people, but just some hesitation around the cloud, having, you know, worked their whole careers with on-prem infrastructure. So would you be able to just talk a bit about how you managed to change that culture and get people on board with the move to cloud?
Yeah, sure. So I gave a high level earlier. So again, it was I sort of inherited expertise, people that had worked at the council for a number of them for quite a while, a lot of expertise in our existing infrastructure, our existing network setup, our existing server infrastructure, VMware, etc. And so it was really about bringing them on that journey. So giving them access to Azure, you know, demonstration sites, giving them training and development courses and access to things like Microsoft Enterprise Skills Initiative. We purchased a solution called Pluralsight. People on the call might know it, but it's a really useful e-learning package as well. And then we did targeted training. But ultimately, what it came down to was getting them involved in the workshops with Cloud Direct. So we needed their expertise to map exactly what our current requirements are and make sure that when the landing zone is configured in Azure and when the systems are migrated, that they operate in the most suitable way and that we can still monitor them and maintain them and back them up, etc. So it was all around that, getting them involved in the process. That was the primary thing. And effectively, I sort of likened it to, you know, many years ago we would have been on physical servers, and that would have gone from a physical to a virtual, you know, P2V to VMware, and this is the next step on from that. And when they sort of saw it like that, and we're involved in the discussions, that really helped the sort of moving forwards.
I think from a partner's perspective as well, you know, there can sometimes be some hesitation around, oh, you know, who are this managed service partner that in? Does that mean that I'm going to lose my job, etc.? And it's absolutely not the case.
No, absolutely not.
It may, you know, it may be if that's what some can, you know, public sector bodies decide, but in this scenario, I mean, our mantra is teach, don't sell, actually. So in this scenario, you know, we actually baked knowledge transfer into the project. We've got, you know, shadowing, screen sharing, workshops for drop-in sessions. And really, it's an educational process. So by the end of the project, the team should be comfortable with, you know, actually being able to manage that environment themselves, or it may be that Cloud Direct take on some of the management, and then you focus on the innovation within the council. So it doesn't always need to be a case that the managed service partner are replacing the team.
No,
in fact, it's never usually like that. We're working as one team to collaborate to get to that common goal. So
yeah, exactly that. And our intention is, as we say, to leverage your skills and experience that we don't have at the moment as part of that migration, as part of that transition process, but whilst we go on the journey to upskill the internal teams, and they will gain that experience and continue to improve. So yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So, you know, that is really everything that was baked into to building the business case. What is actually next for Baines Council?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to answer one that I've seen Gareth put in the chat before we move on to what's next. So Gareth, you've said, do you have very separate infrastructure and application development teams, but you operate in a more DevOps culture? So our structure is, we do have a separate sort of development team, and a separate sort of applications and systems management team, and a separate an infrastructure team that comprises networks and servers and voice and CCTV. What we recognized with the move to Azure is actually being able to leverage quite a lot of the development opportunities that we can't currently on premise. So our development teams, for example, some of the you know, the AI capabilities that are in Azure now, we've all heard about ChatGPT. You know, you can get access to it through Azure when you're hosting your systems there. Things like our Power BI integration. So we're already a Power BI house, so we've already got Power BI Premium available, and then having that really easy for reporting. So all of those solutions hosted on Azure have got a really easy method to Power BI. So yeah, transitioning the sort of development side or application development side, they've been chomping at the bit, Gareth, frankly, to get access to some of these capabilities that we can't properly replicate on premise. So that really excited them, and yeah, they're going down the journey now of leveraging not only some of the 365 Power Platform bits, but also some of the Azure, app services, web services, etc. Containerization that we weren't able to properly replicate. So it's definitely a big opportunity for sort of development side and modernization of applications and integrations as well. Sorry, so what's next for Baines Council? So yeah, so what we described here is a bit around my sort of approval process, some of the challenges and opportunities, where we are right now. So that sort of approval was a few months ago now. So we're now in the stage where we've engaged fully with Cloud Direct. Obviously, we've got a landing zone implemented, we've got backups and stuff set up, etc. And we're now in our workshops for migrating of servers and solutions. So we're on that journey of that migration at the moment, so that's a current solution. What's next for us as well is some of the products that we've recognized aren't suitable to be hosted on Azure. So to give an example, our VoIP solution, we use a Mitel solution currently, and that's an on-prem solution at the moment, and that's not suitable to be lifted and shifted or migrated to Azure. CCTV is another example that again wouldn't be appropriate to lift and shift. So there's a number of areas where we're doing some sort of strategy and pieces of work around unified comms and contact center and migrating to a cloud SaaS solution for those. And again, it's sort of an enabler to ensure that we can decommission our on-premise infrastructure when the Azure migrations are completed, by ensuring that those sort of, I'll call them holdouts, that's probably not the right word, those holdouts are removed. So that's what's next. And then we've spoken a little bit about development, giving people access to some of the Azure tools for modernizing applications is going to be key to our application development teams and integration teams.
That's perfect. Okay, I think that's that's pretty much covered everything then, Liam. So if there's anything any other questions that people have, please do include those. One final question from me, Liam. So obviously now, midway through the project, let's assume that we finished the project very soon. Well, let's not assume. Yeah. We know we're on our way to doing that.
Yeah.
But, what does that actually enable the council to do in future in terms of being able to leverage the cloud?
So what is it? So we've spoken a little bit about this. It's around the access to those capabilities we don't have. So AI is a great example. I was at Microsoft Envision a couple of weeks ago in Excel for the Microsoft event, and some of the capabilities that are built into Azure with the ChatGPT, and you can just gain access to it when you've got those solutions hosted there. That's going to be really exciting. Being able to do some of the integrations between our applications that we've struggled with before, by sort of hosting them on SQL managed services and other areas, whereas previously we were doing some pretty poor replications of tables, etc. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, I would say, available as part of this Azure migration for that. I have spotted a question come in from Roy. Have you prioritized services / data sources systems for ingestion to Azure? Yeah, that's probably worth highlighting, actually. So we've called them workloads. So for example, take social care systems. There's a number of servers and systems that have dependencies. So we use Liquid Logic. A number of you might as well. We have Controc for things like payments, and then there's integrations to other solutions. So we've tried to sort of wrap those up into what we call a workload, so the appropriate dependencies would move in one go. It isn't always quite as nice and neat and tidy as that, but one thing Cloud Direct did for us as part of again one of the workshops is that dependency mapping, because it's a regional piece of work, and that dependency mapping helped us to sort of define those workloads and go, okay, social care systems isn't just liquid logic, it also needs to add contract, it also needs to add X and Y, and then the education systems are this, and the financial systems also need to include income modules as well as the Aggresso application, etc. So that's sort of how we're working with Cloud Direct. We've sort of combined them into those workloads for migration, because you wouldn't want to sort of migrate something in the middle as a main dependency necessarily. What I would say is that by having the Azure Express routes available, so we've added those to our relevant network connections, we can maintain connectivity between the Azure infrastructure and the on-premise infrastructure, so that should we move all the finance systems and the social care systems are a little bit later, they can still talk to each other, etc. But we have tried to package them up into those workloads. And there's anonymous, what's that? Sorry, if people want to reach out, speak to me directly, how can we do this? Josh, I'll put my email address in the chat afterwards, so people can ping me an email. Remind me to do that before the end.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And yeah, Cloud Direct, we'd love to work with you all moving forward if you are migrating to the cloud, but equally there's no pressure. If you just were interested today and just want a bit of advice and stuff like that, then Liam's already said, be more than happy to offer some advice. So either is good.
The biggest for me is that there was no cost to doing all of what I've described, all the workshops with Cloud Direct, all the 5 proposals. That sounds bad, Josh. I shouldn't be bigging this up. Josh, they did this. They did this on the understanding we were fully committed to exploring this as an option, and so it was an investment in time from our side and resources to go to those workshops and really bring up those proposals. But we ended up with a really comprehensive proposal, enabling me to write a suitable business case and get us there. I've got one last question, I think, from Matt, is it? Spanning the point of business systems, hosting, EDMS finance, many of our app servers are currently on-prem, our app teams regularly log on to our on-prem servers, current maintenance, upgrades, solve problems. Yes, absolutely. Cool, that's gone. So somebody's moved it. How did this change for your apps team when we went to Azure? So some of it stays the same. So it depends on how they move. So some of our workloads are moving as is. So lift and shift, crude term, lift and shift VMs. They'll move as is. Some of them will be, so SQL Server is a good example. Currently hosted on a Windows virtual, with SQL Server installed, etc., and then a number of databases or instances on them. Pretty standard setup, right? But actually, they're moving to things like SQL Managed Instance, so we don't need to worry about SQL patching anymore. It's just a database that's available and automatically patched and automatically on the latest version, and can automatically scale depending on the demand of the CPU and RAM. So some of that will change. Some of the logging on for the maintenance upgrades and solving problems, some of that bits will stay, but some of it will change. Some of it will reduce as part of that modernization. But it depends on the workloads. Database is a good example of that. Web servers is another good example. If they're currently hosted on maybe Apaches or IIS, you again don't need to worry about. You enable sort of Azure Web Services, you don't need to worry about the patching and the versions. It's just one less thing to worry about. I'd much rather my staff don't worry about what version it's running and actually do the work around the application or the system or the integration. That is much more value that they're doing there than worrying what version of SQL it is. Hopefully that's answered your question, Matt. Great.
Any final questions there? No, we all good on that?
Oh, I can't see any, but I will put my email address in the chat.
If anyone does have any questions. So next steps from our perspective is that someone in our team will be in touch just to ensure that this webinar was valuable for you, and to see if you do have any further questions for Liam, or if you do want to explore working with Cloud Direct on a free discovery piece of work around your infrastructure at the moment. Just a final point as well, we do have an innovation and security summit coming up. So obviously infrastructure is one area that we focus on, but another area is security. So if you do want to come down and hear from security speakers and network with other heads of IT and discover you know, what opportunities there could be around security and innovation, then we'll send that round to you as well. Finally, Liam or Adam, any final questions in the chat there?
Hi, Adam here. Yeah, we had a question come in from the Microsoft form that was listed on the website for people to answer questions in advance. So one just came through during the webinar. I'll just read it out for you. It was, are you actively encouraging citizen development, allowing the wider organisation to leverage cloud technologies, Power Platform, Teams apps, etc.?
So, sorry, would you mind? Are we allowing? So I think what I'm hearing there is, are we allowing the organisation, the services within the council, access to some of the things like the Power Platform, AI, and bits and pieces like that? That's what I'm reading that as.
I just published it.
Okay, have you just published it? Sorry. Are you actively encouraging citizens development? Citizen development. Okay, so where we are with leveraging cloud technologies, Power Platform, Teams apps, Dataverse, and stuff like that. On the 365 platform, I'd probably do a whole nother thing on that. We're relatively green on certain areas of that sort of Power Platform and that stack, and then some areas we're much further ahead. So Power BI and reporting we've had for a number of years, for example. We are in the process, like everyone is, of moving to things like Power Automate, SharePoint, migration, automations and other bits and pieces. So we have a development team and 365 expertise that's helping us on that journey. So some of the solutions we've got on premise at the moment with sort of web admins and various web forms in scattergun places, and entering information into databases, etc. Things like SharePoint, Power Platform, Microsoft Forms, etc. are all suitable alternatives. Happy to have a further discussion with whoever has asked about that. That's slightly different from the Azure migration, but it's all linked because the Microsoft stacks are heavily integrated. So yeah, Power Platform and SharePoint and things like the Canvas model apps and other solutions are we're exploring at the moment.
Brilliant. Okay, if there's final check for questions. Is there any others?
I've put my email address in the chat, so please, by all means, reach out if somebody wants to discuss further. But my last thing would be just go through the workshops. The initial Microsoft assessment was good, but really the detail came when working with Cloud Direct and going through those workshops. That's when we got to the detail of what that proposed infrastructure could look like, would cost, and would be run, etc. So that would be my recommendation. It is an investment in time, but it paid dividends and certainly helped us move.
Yeah, that's perfect. And Liam, thanks so much for your kindness to help us with this today. And it's been great working with you as well. So really do appreciate your time today. And yeah, look, if anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to answer them afterwards. But we'll wrap this up now. Give everyone 10 minutes back. And yeah, thank you again.
Thanks all.